there, welcome to another SVGator tutorial. Today I'm going to show you how to use SVGator's Player API to create and control an animation programmatically. Basically, we created a button for each animation state, so once I click on Pulse, the jellyfish will pulse infinitely until I click on Pause or another state such as Glow or Jump. Alright, let's see how we need to build this animation to achieve this result. So as you can see, there is a 6-second animation purposely designed so we can divide it into 3 equal sections, 2 seconds long each. The first section will be between 0 and 2 seconds. This sub-animation is going to loop infinitely once the user hits Pulse. Oh yeah, sections, states, sub-animations, we'll be using these terms interchangeably throughout. The next state to animate, the glow animation, will be between 2 and 4 seconds. And lastly, from 4 to 6 seconds will be the jump animation. It's very important for the frame between the sections to be identical. We'll need to make sure that the jellyfish is in the same position and state at second 0, then the same at 2 and 4, and also at second 6. Now, let's see how we should export the project to be able to control it programmatically. We go to Export. We choose SVG as our format. We make sure that the animation type is set to JavaScript and that the start animation is set to programmatic. By the way, you can check out the Player API's documentation by clicking this link here, but you can also find it in the description of this video. All right, let's click Export. Now, let's open up Sublime Text, which we are going to use to make the magic and create our interactive animation. We're going to create a new file and save it with an HTML extension. We're going to use this dummy HTML to showcase the API. However, you will place your SVG on your web page directly. Let's create the HTML structure and give it a title. Let's call it My SVGator API Test. We've prepared some styling to make our page slightly more appealing. Let me copy this CSS code that we prepared here in between some style tags. If you are interested in how we styled it, you can pause the video and check it out. Let's close this. Now we're going to create a div container for our SVG and give it the ID of SVG container. All right, now let's open up the SVG that we exported earlier in Sublime and copy-paste all of its contents into this container we just created. Select all, copy, and paste it right here in the div container. We're going to close this as well for now. Underneath the div container, we are going to create a script tag which is going to hold all the logic that will control the animation. Right here in JavaScript, we're going to get the reference to the target SVG element that will be animated and put it in a constant that we are going to call SVgElement. For this, we're going to need the ID of the SVG. So we're going to go to the top, find the ID attribute of the SVG, and copy its value. And we're going to paste it right here. This SVG element constant has a property SVGatorPlayer, which is the endpoint that is used to communicate with the API. To start controlling the animation, we have to see when the player is ready. We do this by calling the ready method on the SVGatorPlayer. This method takes a callback function. So we're going to create a function called control_svg, which we will give the method as a callback. This callback function is going to receive a parameter, which is going to be the player. This is the parameter we're going to use to actually control the animation. Now we have to know how many sections the SVG has. So we're going to create a constant called sections. We know that it has 3 sections. We also need to know what is the duration of a given section. So we're going to create a constant, section duration, which is going to be the entirety of the duration of the animation, divided by the number of sections. We need to know what is the section we are currently in. So we're going to create a variable called current section, which is going to be the first section by default. Then we need another variable for the section to jump to when the user interacts with the button, which initially is the same as the current section. And we also have to know if we have a pending animation switch. So another variable, changeAnimation, that by default is going to be false. Now let's create the buttons, which are going to control the animation. We are going to create a container for the buttons. Now we're going to give it the ID buttons. We're going to create 4 buttons, each one with its own ID. I'm going to have the pulse button, the glow button, the jump button, and of course we also want to be able to stop the animation, so a stop button as well. Great, now that our buttons are created, we have to get the reference to them in JavaScript, and that's an event listener. So we're going to create a constant called buttons, which is going to hold the reference to the buttons container, which we called buttons. We're also going to need the reference to the first button so that we can set its text. Good, now that we have the references, we can actually add the event listener within our control_svg function. We're going to be listening for the click event. And since this is taking another callback function, we're going to create another function, onClick, that we are going to give it as callback. And this one takes as parameter the event. Now, to detect exactly which button was clicked, we have to detect what ID was clicked. If the button is the pulse button, we're going to toggle the play state. If it's the glow button, we're going to jump to the glow animation. If it's the jump button, we're going to jump to the jump animation. And if it's the stop button, our default switch case, we're going to stop the animations. Now, let's take them one by one. As we said, if the button interacted with is the pulse button, we're going to toggle the state of the animation between playing and pausing. And we're also going to change the text of the button to be either pulse or pause. For this, we use the player.toggle, which toggles between play and pause. And then we have the button inner text, which we are going to set, depending on if the player is playing, to pause, or if it's paused, to pulse. If the button is the glow button, we check if the animation is playing. And we also check if the current section is the default animation. So, current section is the very first one. And if both of these are true, we tell our code that the animation change is pending. And we set the section to jump to be the glowing animation, which is the second animation. If the button interacted with is jump, we apply the same method as for the glow button. So we see if the player is playing, and if the current section is the default animation, and if so, we set the change animation to be true, and the section to jump to be the jump animation, which is the third animation. Great. On the last button, which is the stop button, if the user interacted with the stop button, we stop the animation. For that, we have player.stop. We also set the current section and the section to jump to be the default animation. So the current section is going to be the first animation. The section to jump to is going to be the same. And we also set the text of the first button to be pulse. So we use the pulse button.inner text, and we set it to pulse. Now let's add a keyframe listener so that the currently playing section finishes playing before it can transition to the next section. For that, we go inside the control SVG and we add player on. And we're going to listen to keyframe. And since this is taking another function callback, we're going to have an onKeyframe change function which we're going to write right here. Now, this callback function has a keyframe parameter, which we're going to use to see where we are in the animation. So if the animation keyframe hasn't progressed past the current section's boundary, we won't do anything. For this, we have to do if keyframe is lesser than section duration, times the current section plus 1, then we do absolutely nothing. Otherwise, let's use the change animation variable that we created earlier to detect if the animation has to either restart or jump to another section. We've already done part of this by setting change animation to true when either the glow or jump buttons are interacted with. Right here and here. Now let's go to the keyframe listener and check if the change animation is true. Then if so, we're going to actually change the animation. Otherwise, we are going to restart with the default animation. Now let's see how we're going to change the animation. If change animation is true, we jump to the section that was selected. Using player.seek to section duration, times section to jump to. We update the current section to be the section to jump to, and we reset the animation change flag. Now we have the jump to animation part of the keyframe listener. Otherwise, we reset the animation to the beginning with player.restart. And we also have to set the current section to the default animation. And the section to jump to the same thing. Okay, let's check if the interactive controls behave as expected. So here we have the SVG, all paused. We hit pulse, and it starts pulsating. Now we hit glow, it jumps to the glow animation. When we hit jump, and it does the jump animation. We can also pause the animation, and of course, stop it. In that case, it's going to start from the very beginning. All right. In the description below, you can find the downloadable assets where we've added some extra details like disabled states for the buttons, the link to our code pen where you can play around with the project, and the link to our player API so that you can make more amazing interactions with the SVGs created with SVGator. Check those out. That's about it. Until next time.